Good afternoon. My name is Kwafo Odako with Kelly Cawthorn, and I have the pleasure today to introduce a frequent guest at this point now of our KC series and webinar series, Director Jen Flood. Director Flood, how are we doing on this fine Tuesday?
Doing well. I think the sun is trying to shine.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so
that's
doing well. Thanks for having me.
that's great. I mean, it's about time right here in Michigan to have that sun shining. So, I appreciate, and I know the whole firm appreciates you spending time with us for the next hour to go over the budget. You might have been in the news last week a little bit with some of the budget aspects that the governor's put forth. So we appreciate your time and going through some of the things that are of interest to our client base and also just to the general public. So I appreciate that. I'll do the intro, even though I've known you forever. People around Lansing, around the state probably know you forever, but I'm going to do the intro to make sure we stay, on time and on brand. So, Director Flood is responsible for coordinating all aspects of the state's budget. Prior to serving in the state budget office, Director Flood served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor Gretchen Whitmer, where she managed key divisions of the executive office, including policy, ledge affairs, federal affairs, appointments, community engagement, and scheduling. She also worked as a government policy advisor at Dykema, a communications specialist at Byron Fisk Advocacy Communications. Spent time in the Michigan House and Michigan Senate Executive Office of Governor Granholm, and for most importantly, Director Flood holds a bachelor's degree in economics and master's of public policy from Michigan State University. Go Green.
All right.
Perfect. So yeah, I think next order of operations, Director Flood, if you're okay with it, is I think you have some prepared materials you wanted to go over. So we'll do that, and then I'll ask some Q&A, and then we'll open up to all the folks that are joining us in real time for some questions answered from that group. Does that sound good?
That sounds like a plan.
All right, perfect. Let's roll.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to do an abridged version of the budget overview. Won't go as in depth as we did in committee last week, but happy to give a preview and then look forward to some dialogue. I'll just start with an overview of how far we've come. This is the governor's eighth and final budget that she's presenting. And thanks to her leadership and our partnership with the legislature, Michigan is stronger today than it was 8 years ago, fiscally, economically, and competitively. That progress did not happen on accident. It came from the governor's steady leadership and bipartisan work focused on long-term sustainability. The commitment to our kids has been just as deliberate. We now have free pre-K for every 4-year-old with record enrollment. There are currently more than 51,000 kids enrolled, and there's been 121,000 kids served since we opened up access to free pre-K. Per pupil funding has increased from 7,800 to more than $10,000 per pupil, more than 30% increase. This strengthens our classrooms and expands support for students. And free breakfast and lunch are now offered to every public school student because we know that when students are fed, they're ready to learn. Our economic strategy has been focused on entrepreneurship and good paying jobs. This focus is paying off. Last year, CNBC ranked Michigan as a top state for business, recognition that reflects improvements in our workforce, infrastructure, and overall competitiveness. Since 2021, state programs have helped launch more than 4,500 new small businesses. Investments in innovators and high growth sectors have helped to spur more than $12 billion in new industry investment since 2019, advancing our leadership in advanced manufacturing, mobility, defense, and technology. And this year also marks the first full year of our new long-term dedicated road funding plan, ensuring finally that every dollar paid at the pump goes directly to our roads and bridges. And this predictable funding means safer roads all across our state and supports 30,000 good paying jobs every year. It also includes 160 million for transit. So we're making record investments there. On lowering costs, we've taken concrete steps to help ease financial pressure on households. We know inflation has been a concern for families across the state, and a governor can't solve inflation on her own, but we are focused on doing what we can to help keep more money in people's pockets. So we quintupled the working families tax credit. That is $3,900 per family in joint state and federal benefit, and that benefits 665,000 working households across the state. That's money that helps with childcare, rent, groceries, utility bills, and is invested back in local communities. We cut taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security. We've expanded affordable housing, building more than 80,000 housing units since the governor took office, and that's supported by our investment in the Housing and Community Development Fund. Housing stability is economic stability for families and for communities. We'd like to do more work in this space in the governor's final year. On revenue sharing, we've increased it by more than 300 million. That's 31% increase since the governor took office. We know this funding helps communities support police, fire, roads, bridges, and providing essential services. And underlying all of this is fiscal responsibility. We've got 7 bipartisan balanced budgets, billions paid down in debt, credit rating upgrades, strong reserves, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. And the progress that we've made gives us the footing to control what's ahead, thoughtfully, strategically, and without losing sight of the people who depend on the decisions that we make. This year, we've got our work cut out for us. A couple of the biggest factors playing into the development of this fiscal year 27 budget is federal and economic uncertainty, new costs and funding cliffs, and continued pressure from HR 1. First, I want to talk a little bit about rising healthcare costs. Rising healthcare costs are impacting people and small businesses across our state. Costs per person are increasing in Medicaid, and that puts pressure on the state budget, just like it does families and small businesses as well. Even though our Medicaid enrollment has decreased, the cost has increased, and national spending is projected to grow 8 to 9% each year. Here in Michigan, the remaining enrollees in Medicaid are older, sicker, and higher acuity, and our aging population drives some of these longer-term care costs. So we actually run a lean Medicaid program. We're recognized across nationally for being one of the most effective and cost-efficient, but inflation and federal cost shifts hitting at the same time limit our ability to contain costs through efficiency alone. HR 1, some call it the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I'll refer to it as HR 1, the reconciliation package passed by Congress last summer. The timing is tough. Just as healthcare costs are rising, the federal government is passing the tab to states on some critical programs that have long had a federal-state partnership. That's going to look differently. So when HR 1 passed, it immediately blew a $1 billion hole in our budget last summer. While Michiganders continue to pay the same amount in federal taxes, we're getting less back in federal support, and the state's paying more. So you could see this chart on the right. When the bill first passed, we were projecting a $10 billion hit to the state's general fund by 2032. We took some really important steps last year in the fall alongside the budget to mitigate those impacts and shrink that 10 billion down to 4 billion. 4 billion is pretty significant still. And so the work we did last year enabled us to protect $2.7 billion in annual Medicaid funding. We also invested earlier than a lot of other states in driving down our SNAP error rate, which is going to save us hundreds of millions of dollars into the future. And we got all this done while we maintained core services and passed a $2 billion roads plan. Like I mentioned, $4 billion is still significant. And so some of those costs are reflected here in our fiscal year 27 budget. So we have Medicaid eligibility changes, work requirements going into effect, as well as $100 million every year that the federal government used to cover to administer SNAP that is now passed along to the state. In fiscal year 28 and beyond, the state will be responsible for covering a share of the actual SNAP benefits that's tied to what our SNAP error rate is, which is why we're laser focused on driving that down. That's been a bipartisan effort. The department's made great progress over the past few years. We were closer to a 13% error rate, and we're now down to 9, but we've got to get under 6 to set the next administration up for success. There's also additional Medicaid financing and provider tax changes coming in the out year. Outside of the state budget, there are other significant impacts to Michiganders. We're projecting 200,000 people could lose access to Medicaid due to HR 1. We also saw the expiration of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, which will increase costs for families and decrease enrollment by at least 6%. And Michigan hospitals are projecting an estimated $6.5 billion hit through fiscal year 32. I always appreciate the opportunity to gather with my counterparts from across the country. We get together a couple times a year to compare notes, best practices, and it also leaves me feeling really good about where Michigan is at. We are well prepared to weather what's ahead. But this sort of storm of increasing healthcare costs and the HR 1 costs hitting state budgets at the same time as economic uncertainty, changing trade and tariff policy. There's a lot of different ways that people are approaching these challenges, and there's a sample of them reflected here. Democratic-led states, Republican-led states. There are several states proposing using north of $1 billion in reserves. You have states like Alaska proposing new sales taxes, tobacco and corporate tax increases. In other states, K-12 funding in South Dakota held flat, and in Idaho, they're exploring a cut. So getting into fiscal year 27, we are coming into this budget facing a $1.8 billion gap due to the pressures that we talked about. Declining revenues and softening national economic outlook, rising healthcare costs, some of the costs of HR 1 hitting the state's budget, persistent inflation, and then a small handful of critical investments that we must make. So in our budget, we're proposing a responsible mix of new revenue, reductions in efficiencies, and reserves to deliver a budget that benefits all Michiganders. You can see here this pie chart reflects the $1.8 billion that we're solving for. We've got about 22% coming from reserves. This is a $400 million withdrawal from our rainy day fund. The revenue estimating conference, which is held by the state's economists in January, calculated a withdrawal for this year of $540 million. So we're recommending about 3/4 of that. We have 43% of our solve coming from revenue and 35% from reductions, efficiencies, and redirected revenue. And so when you look at the budget, here's a snapshot. Total for fiscal year 27 is $88 billion. You can see 41% of that comes from the federal government, 17% is state restricted funds, about 1/4 is a school aid fund, and the general fund, which is where most of the action is here in our negotiation with the legislature, is about 16%. And when you look at the general fund, the budget that we put out last week totals $13.6 billion. That is $1.7 billion less in general fund than we presented 1 year ago. And then compared to the fiscal year 26 budget, which we negotiated in the fall, it's $500 million less. Of that, about half is health and human services, 20% public safety, higher education is 9%, and then all of the rest of state government is in this 19%. Taking a moment on fiscal responsibility, we have paid down from when the governor took office to when she leaves at the end of this year, we will have paid down $28 billion in debt, which is a huge accomplishment. No matter the ups and downs and who was in charge of the legislature, we stuck with the plan of paying down debt, made some additional payments and are well ahead of schedule. We've had our credit rating upgraded. And since the governor took office, we will have nearly tripled reserves, including that $400 million withdrawal that I mentioned. So we've got in the budget stabilization fund, 20 years ago, there was 2.2 million in the BSF, and today we've got 2.2 billion. On top of that, we've established a new school aid rainy day fund, which you can see captured here in sort of like the bright teal. It's got just over 500 million in it. And then we also have some other school aid reserves that have nearly $1 billion. So for fiscal year 27, we're proposing that $400 million withdrawal. We will still have over $3 billion in reserves. So what is in the fiscal year 27 budget? We're continuing to focus on the kitchen table issues that you've heard the governor talk about for the last 7 years. So what can we do to save Michiganders money? How can we ensure that every kid has what they need to succeed? We're ensuring that we're protecting Medicaid and healthcare, creating jobs and growing the economy, keeping our communities safe. And what can we do to make government more efficient and effective? On helping Michiganders save money, we're continuing tax relief that's making a real difference. So the Working Families Tax Credit, or the EITC, as I mentioned, saves families nearly $4,000 every year. We implemented last year no tax on tips, overtime, and Social Security. We're continuing in this budget despite the pressures and challenges, the repeal of the retirement tax, which saves seniors $1,000 per year. And we've introduced 2 new concepts for lowering costs this year. One is a sales tax holiday during back to school shopping to help save parents money, and also property tax relief for seniors by restoring an income tax deduction related to property taxes. We estimate that will save the average household $345 per year. Our road funding package is reflected in this budget. I know Kelly Cawthorn has many clients in this space, so just want to thank you for your continued partnership and advocacy over the last 7 years. We got it done, and it's reflected in this year's budget. So it phases in over time up to just shy of $2 billion. In this year's budget, we've got $1.6 billion with the funding going to both state roads and local roads. We're surging resources to improve bridges, do rail grade separation, a big surge for public transit infrastructure on the front end. And when you count the existing resources in the base budget, federal resources, and the new roads package, this budget has over $5.8 billion in support for roads, bridges, and transit. On growing Michigan's jobs, we have in this budget, we're proposing $150 million for site readiness. This is to make sure that we've got shovel-ready sites across the state to help land jobs and compete. We also have targeted investment in maritime and ports, drones, defense and aerospace, and supporting our maritime manufacturing workforce. Literacy was a priority of the governor's on day one when she came in, and we're doubling down in her last year here. We've made some great progress and built some real momentum in terms of bipartisan support for embracing evidence-based literacy initiatives. So in this budget, we have a 2.5% increase in the per pupil foundation allowance, an additional 6% for the weights in our foundation allowance. We're also taking a step towards codifying the weighted foundation allowance, so we're not debating every year how much goes into at-risk or ELL, but we make sure that we know that certain students need additional resources. So making sure that those dollars follow the students into the classrooms. We have additional funding for literacy coaches, curriculum grants to encourage districts to embrace evidence-based literacy curriculum, additional letters, training. We continue our investment in free pre-K. and 300 million in mental health and school safety for a total of 440 million in fiscal year 27. And then we have an additional investment, both ongoing and one time, in before and after school programs. On higher education, there's a total of 2.2 billion to sustain operations support for universities and community colleges. Our scholarship investments are at record levels, so 753 million for scholarships to provide Michiganders with an affordable pathway to a certificate or a degree, like the Community College Guarantee and the Achievement Scholarship. In this budget, we're proposing lowering the age for the Michigan Reconnect program permanently from 25 down to 21. And we also have 60 million for items funding for universities and community college campuses. Ensuring access to healthcare is a top priority for the governor, and ensuring sustainability for Medicaid is a top priority for us in this fiscal year 27 budget. We're proposing new revenue to preserve healthcare coverage for eligible Michiganders, and also proposing cost efficiency measures to make sure that the program is sustainable into the future. So the budget includes 232 million from increased tobacco tax rates that are more consistent with other states. In Michigan, we haven't increased our tobacco tax in about 20 years. We also are proposing, again, a tax on e-cigarettes and vape products and bringing that up to the proposed tobacco tax increase. We have taxes on iGaming and sports betting to align Michigan with other states. Michigan moved quickly here, and we've seen other states come into the market, and they have higher taxes and fees and are still generating revenue. So we're proposing some changes to bring us more in line with other states and dedicating the revenue to Medicaid. And then we also include a 4.7% gross receipts tax on digital advertising. At the same time that we're proposing this revenue for Medicaid, we're also proposing 150 million in efficiency savings, where we set a target. We'll work with stakeholders in the weeks and months ahead to look at cost, resource effectiveness, and sustainability. HR 1 implementation is another big pillar of this budget. We have 95 million included for the new state share of SNAP administrative costs, which was changed in HR 1. We've included 60 million in DHHS to fund staff and beneficiary support to implement new federal work requirements for Medicaid and SNAP. So those are additional resources to help maintain access to care for people who depend on Medicaid. Medicaid serves 2.5 million Michiganders. That's 1 in 4. It's more than 1 million children in our state. It's seniors, people with disabilities, and pregnant women. And making sure that they can meet these new requirements is going to be critical to keeping costs down for enrollees, but also for hospitals who would pick up on uncompensated care that gets absorbed by commercial markets. As Director Hertel says, people still access care. It's just a matter of who pays, and without access to insurance, preventative care is delayed and people end up in the emergency room. It costs everyone more. So we are investing to help make sure people maintain access to care. At the same time, we're providing resources to LEO to provide job search and training resources, employment services, and expansion of registered apprenticeships to help residents meet these new work requirements. And then finally, there's $2 million to enhance enterprise data sharing to streamline verification and ensure compliance for these new requirements. Michigan has a lot of lessons learned in terms of helping Michiganders maintain access to care. Folks may remember Governor Snyder had signed into law Medicaid work requirements. When Governor Whitmer came into office, we were ramping up for those to be implemented. Courts turned those over before they actually went into effect, but we sort of went through that process of ramping up to implement the work requirements. And then when the public health emergency ended during COVID, we undertook a massive effort to help enrollees maintain access to care and recertify. So there's a lot of technological improvements that we have already made to streamline, but we're adding some additional resources to make sure we're sharing data and doing everything the state can to help people out. Some additional healthcare investments. We have 4.1 million for community health workers to help with implementing work requirements and reaching people where they're at. Some of the new resources from tobacco taxes are dedicated to prevention, smoking, and vaping cessation through mental and behavioral health support, Healthy Michigan Fund. There's also some cancer treatment and other important investments there. We invested years ago in a new state-of-the-art state psychiatric hospital in Southeast Michigan. It's a world-class facility that's going to open during fiscal year 27. So that requires the resources that we have reflected in this budget. We also have $351 million included to increase wages for direct care workers who have some of the hardest jobs in our state. And then there's $10 million one-time for nursing homes to help stabilize staffing levels, enhance training, and improve quality of care for residents. We, at the same time, want to make sure that our communities are thriving, and this budget includes $6 million to attract major events and conventions to our state. We have $16 million to sustain support for Pure Michigan, $13.7 million total for arts and cultural programs, $59 million for business attraction and community revitalization. And we're proposing some changes to the Housing Community Development Fund to expand its eligible use to make sure that we can serve more families and more communities and focus on things like neighborhood revitalization, infill housing, and other locally driven housing solutions. Protecting public safety remains a priority. We've got $1.7 billion to sustain revenue sharing at current levels, $50 million for public safety revenue sharing to help units across the state prevent violent crime, $2.5 million to implement the recommendations of the statewide gun violence prevention task force and build on the progress that we've made in this space, $6.7 million to continue to invest in Michigan's public safety communication system, $2 million to help communities build climate adaptation strategies. We're drawing down additional federal resources to support local ambulance services and supporting the State Appellate Defender's Office to support the resentencing of 19 and 20-year-old life offenders based on court rulings. And then we also have $346,000 for firefighter training grants. This budget includes investments in protecting our air, land, and water, including $80 million from increased tipping fees to protect Michigan from out-of-state waste. It has a total of $400 million to continue investing in clean drinking water, local water systems, and replacing lead service lines across the state. An additional perk of the road funding package is that $17 million in fuel tax revenue will support outdoor recreation on motorized trails. We are continuing to focus on modernizing our game fishing and boating fees to support improvements to our state parks. We have $6.5 million to preserve forest lands in the Keweenaw Heartlands and $300,000 for forest stewardship and improvements to a public harbor to increase access on the Detroit River. A few of our efforts to make government more efficient and effective. We're continuing to support the extension of the judicial statewide case management system, improving internal compliance and risk management at LARA, additional efforts to prevent fraud and ensure payments are accurate and appropriate at DHHS, as well as $40 million to support the election equipment reserve fund to support local communities across the state. Here is a normal budget cycle calendar. We are at about 3 o'clock here. with the governor presenting her budget in February. Typically, we'll see legislative action between now and May. There will be an additional revenue estimating conference on May 15th, 16th, mid-May, where the economists will again come together and finalize the revenues that are available for the fiscal year 27 budget. And in a typical year, we get together with the House and the Senate and negotiate a full budget in June. I'm optimistic that we'll meet that deadline this year. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Okay. It's a lot to unpack, and I think most of us share that same hopefulness that we can get through the budget cycle in the time set out that has been long the tradition in our great state. So there did through the pendency of your presentation, there were some questions from the audience. So I'll blend those in with some questions I have for you as well. Thinking about that as we move through the remainder of our time today. So the first thing that comes to mind is some of the tough decisions, right? Due to the revenue decrease in the general fund. As we start, pretty early stage in the budget cycle for fiscal year 27, how is the administration prioritizing which long-term programs to protect versus which sort of pandemic era one-time expansions have to be scaled back? You went through some of that, but if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, that'd be great.
Sure. We were really disciplined. We benefited greatly from some unprecedented one-time federal resources during the pandemic, and we were meticulous about how we spent those dollars. A majority of which we appropriated during the governor's first term with an all-Republican legislature. We had some incredible one-time investments that we made. Building out the new state psychiatric hospital. We've got a new state lab that will also open soon here that's world class. We invested in clearing the backlog of maintenance issues at state parks. You're probably seeing that work as you drive around the state. It will wrap up this year. Water infrastructure, we invested billions. And so we were really careful about making sure that we spent those one-time dollars on one-time purposes so that we weren't like building out this future cliff. Other states were not as careful in that sense. So we're really well positioned when it comes to those dollars sort of running out. They were all appropriated by the end of calendar year 2024, and there's a deadline for every last dollar to be spent by December 31st of this year. And I'm proud. The governor said, I don't want to send one penny of that money back to Washington, D.C. And so on December 31st of 2024, we had appropriated every single last dollar. And we've got a team here in the budget office that is laser focused on making sure every last dollar gets spent. So that's sort of the one-time COVID dollars. When it comes to the fiscal year 27 budget, as I mentioned, we've got a $1.8 billion hole that we're looking at after you take into consideration some of the challenges that we're facing. And so what we put together is a responsible mix of revenue to support things that are most important, which is maintaining access to healthcare for us. Responsible draw from reserves that's still structurally balanced, so using one-time dollars for one-time purposes, and also making some reductions and looking at efficiencies. So that is sort of our plan for how we make the pieces fit together, and we'll look forward to seeing the legislative solutions on how we balance competing priorities and make sure that we protect what's most important.
Appreciate that answer. Just moving on to kind of the federal interplay. You talked both last week and then in your comments today about the federal government and the impacts of HR 1, especially as it relates to essential services like Medicaid. We talked about the 200,000 Michiganders potentially at risk of losing access. And what specific fiscal mechanisms is the office exploring to sustain the services without going beyond what you stated in terms of the rainy day fund? So what are the guardrails in to kind of ensure what's happening at the federal level still allows folks in Michigan to receive the much needed services?
Yes, we've been on a roller coaster going back to last January. We've seen a lot of pauses in federal appropriations, grants, longstanding programs. We've coordinated across the executive branch with the attorney general to participate in a number of lawsuits, the bulk of which have been successful in unfreezing dollars, having them flow back to the state. But that is something that we monitor very closely and coordinate with other states on to make sure that if there is a court ruling in favor of dollars flowing, we're a part of it. So we benefit from that ruling. And then in terms of just federal appropriations, it's been a roller coaster. Last year in the spring and early summer, reconciliation was moving. We tracked that really closely. Medicaid and SNAP changes were the biggest changes that we monitored. We partnered with a congressional delegation to advocate for our state and make sure that we continue drawing those dollars down and protecting the core services that are most important. They could do another reconciliation bill. There's a very small federal government shutdown happening right now with the federal DHS. We've added staff and a whole team here because there is so much activity at the federal level, both to monitor what's going on, to advocate for our state, and to be prepared for what might come. And we're constantly doing scenario planning, planning up, planning down, left, right, to be nimble for whatever comes our way. But when we talk about HR1 and trying to mitigate some of the challenges, maintaining Medicaid is core for us. The governor worked when she was in the state Senate. She worked with then Governor Snyder to pass Medicaid expansion. And it was a bipartisan effort because it was the right thing to do. And so maintaining access to healthcare has always been a core priority of Governor Whitmer's. And that's sort of our guiding light here going into fiscal year 27 in this challenging year.
Yeah. I want to blend in a question that came from one of our viewers today. So talking about the $150 million in efficiency savings in Medicaid, so we'll stay on Medicaid for a second, in collaboration with stakeholders. Do you want to ferret that out a little bit more and talk a little bit more about what that actually is?
Yes, we have, alongside proposing revenue for Medicaid, which we'll need to ensure long-term sustainability. We also want to take a look at efficiencies, take a look at what other states are doing to make sure that the program is sustainable in the long term. Like I mentioned, Michigan has one of the most cost-effective Medicaid programs. We're proud of that. It makes like some of the low-hanging fruit that other people would go to not an option. And so as I watch what peers are doing in other states, they're going out the door with Medicaid cuts across the board, rate reductions across the board. We're not doing that, but we're saying let's pull together stakeholders. We all have a shared interest in making sure people maintain access to healthcare and that our Medicaid program is sustainable in the long term. And that's where we set a target of 150 million to come up with a menu of options.
Okay, appreciate that response. I just want to go to something that you've mentioned before in previous comments and just in your role. There's an emphasis on the numbers and not just the numbers, that they're values. And given sort of the current fiscal constraints, which you've articulated both last week and today, how do you balance the governor's Michigan guarantee, such as free pre-K and the community college, with what's happening with the reality of the shrinking fund of the general fund having to be reduced to kind of fill in budget holes? So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, we always try to take the approach of what does the budget mean to real people. We've talked about access to healthcare. That's obviously one big place that touches Michiganders across the state. But when we're looking at solving for a $1.8 billion hole, we want to try to protect the investments that we've made over the last 7 years that make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And there's nowhere I turn to more quickly than investing in our kids. our kids are our future, and we've made historic investments in them, and we've got to make sure to continue doing that. So in solving for this $1.8 billion, we wanted to make sure that we maintain access to every 4-year-old for high quality pre-K, because we know there's lifelong returns on that early investment. And it also saves parents $14,000 a year. As a person who's researching enrollment options currently and looking forward to one less daycare payment every month later this year, I know that this makes a real difference to people. Similarly, free school meals. We talk about how that saves families about $1,000 per year. It also saves moms and dads valuable time in the morning, whether it's more time with kids or getting to work. It's something that people feel. And the free school meals is something that we've heard organically from more Michiganders about than anything else. And so we want to make sure that we maintain that. And then finally, the post-high school investments that we've made in scholarships. We know that the ability to earn a certificate, associate's degree, or bachelor's degree, it helps our state meet our 60 by 30 goal and become more economically competitive. But it also leads to lifelong returns for the person who earns a degree, especially for first generation degree earners. And so we're looking at how do we solve this $1.8 billion hole, making sure that we maintain the new. We used to talk about K through 12, but now it's really pre-K through post-secondary is one of the core priorities that we're focused on protecting.
Okay. Appreciate that answer. I want to talk a little bit. There's a healthcare theme through some of the questions here, but want to talk a little bit about the funds for direct care workers and whether or not those funds that are allocated to nursing facilities, or will they be allocated to nursing facilities, the home health program, and the My Choice waiver. It's rather specific, but if you care to shed any light on that, that'd be helpful for our audience.
Sure. Our direct care workers are some of the hardest working people across our state. They help to take care of the most vulnerable, and they do not get paid enough. Going back to the governor's first term during the pandemic, we worked with Republicans in the legislature to pass a wage uplift for direct care workers so that we were helping to recruit more workers into the space. I know employers looking to hire direct care workers are competing with fast food restaurants, and that's not how things should go. These are really critical jobs. So going back, I think it was in 2020, we first passed that increase to wages, and that's been built upon since then. What we're including in this budget would get direct care workers up to $18.40. I believe. I'll circle back if I've got that number wrong, but it should be $18.40 through the same channels and mechanisms that we've done the DCW wage uplift in previous years.
Okay, appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the end of the road, right? In a lot of ways. This budget is obviously the final full budget cycle for yourself and the governor. From a strategic director's perspective, how do you balance the desire to cement a lasting policy legacy with the responsibility of leaving the state's finances in a stable, bipartisan position for the next administration?
I think we can do both things. And that was sort of at the front of mind for us when we were building this budget. The governor feels strongly that we will leave the state better than we found it. And when she came in, our reserves were at $1.1 billion. We are now north of $3 billion. And so as we built this final budget, we wanted to make sure that we were protecting the things that are our core priorities and really the kitchen table issues that you hear the governor talk about: investments in education, lowering costs, protecting access to healthcare, the roads plan, while also setting up the person who comes behind her for success. So whether that's the record reserves that we've built up or our efforts to drive down the SNAP error rate, the impact to the state's balance sheet if we don't get below a 6% error rate, doesn't hit until the next governor takes office. But we know it's critical to do, and we want to set whoever that is up for success. So we're doubling down. We've got a work group internal across state government, multi-agency, focused on doing everything we can to drive that down to make sure that whoever comes next is set up for success.
Okay. We'll go back to healthcare with one more question here. With respect to our seniors in Michigan, can you describe how they're affected by the healthcare forecast that was presented?
Will you repeat the end of that question? I'm sorry.
And it could be my mic. So, for senior citizens in Michigan, how are they affected by the healthcare forecast that was laid out?
Yeah, we know the Medicaid program serves primarily children, seniors, people with disabilities, and pregnant women. And so Medicare does not cover long-term care coverage. So when you think of seniors in nursing homes who are looking for assistance, that's the Medicaid program. That's a part of why ensuring our Medicaid program is sustainable is so important to us, because we know that population is growing and they're reliant on Medicaid to make sure they have access to care as they age and can do so with dignity. We've made additional investments into programs like PACE that help seniors age in their home, which is where oftentimes they prefer to be, and the costs are lower for the state. So we're continuing to invest in PACE while also making sure that our Medicaid program is sustainable so we can continue that coverage for seniors into the future.
Okay. So here's one that is quite interesting given where we are. You have to, in your role, work with legislators from both parties, local officials, unions, business groups. Everyone has their opinion, including yours truly, about the budget. How do you navigate those relationships and find common ground?
The thing I like about budgets is like everyone has to come to the table. And so I think during the governor's first term, we had an all Republican legislature and we were able to do some of our best work then. I mean, we've built on it since, but that's how we got the Reconnect program established. That's where we first implemented direct care worker wage increases. And, you know, there is a lot of focus on partisanship and differing priorities, but I do believe at the end of the day, we all care about the same things. We might come at it from a different direction or a different philosophy, but the passion that different parties, legislators, stakeholders bring to the table comes from them wanting to make sure that our kids can succeed and they stay here in the state after they graduate and get a degree. And we want to make sure that we're competing for jobs, especially in this time of economic uncertainty. Our pure Michigan lifestyle, protecting our air, land, and water. That's something that's important to all of us. So everyone brings their priorities to the table and you've got fixed resources to make all the puzzle pieces fit together. So it's been a great privilege and opportunity to serve in this role for the governor. And I know that we'll bring all the parties together one last time to make the pieces fit.
Like bringing the band back together for one tour, right?
That's right.
So just thinking about you personally and your role, if you were to look forward, if we were to look a decade forward in the future, what do you hope Michigan looks like because of the decisions the governor and yourself are looking to make today, along with the legislature? And if you had to explain to your own kids why the work that you've done over the last couple of years matters, what would you say?
I'm laughing because in the fall, I was MIA for a couple weeks at home, and my husband told my kids that I was working on a big special project and that project was going to help kids. Mm. And my 4-year-old said, "Well, it doesn't help me." It's grounding. I do think it will help him.
You get it at home too, like the press. I guess so.
But I really do think the work that we've done is laying the groundwork for our state to be successful in the future. We're investing in our kids. And sometimes that return doesn't happen overnight, but the historic investments we've made in education, the expansion of our early childhood education, those kids who didn't have access to pre-K, they do now, and that's going to set them up for lifetime learning and success. The additional investments in making an associate's or bachelor's degree more affordable, that's a game changer. I'm a first generation college student, so I've seen firsthand the impacts of a 4-year degree and all of the new opportunities that that opens up. Protecting our air, land, and water, the governor's talked about climate change. And when I talk to some of my counterparts out west or in the Southwest, like our Great Lakes are an underappreciated asset. And I think we're going to see more and more people come to appreciate just how important they are. And so the protections that we put into place and investments we've made, I think will make our state better positioned. So I hope that, our population's thriving, people have access to more opportunity, higher wages, and our population continues to grow like it did last year.
Very good. In the limited time we have left, is there anything else you'd like to leave for our clients that are on, people that are going to watch this, in the days moving forward?
Well, I know that we've had an opportunity to work with so many of your clients over the past 7 years. And I think first, I want to say thank you to folks in the education space, healthcare, roads. I know I'm forgetting
Energy.
some energy.
Yeah.
We've done so much good work together, and I look forward to building on that this year. I know that you've got some important clients who are tracking Medicaid and have interest in making sure that our program is sustainable into the long term. So we look forward to partnering with you on that, as well as looking at increased tobacco and vape taxes to ensure that sustainability, bring Michigan in line with other states, and help achieve a healthier population. So we'll partner with anyone who's got shared goal, even if there's a different approach on how we get there. We'd love to hear from you and look forward to working together in the months ahead.
Okay, very good. And I just like to say thank you on behalf of the firm for spending the time together, getting looks like some folks from in there, looks like the firefighters appreciate the work you all have done. So that's a kudos for you and your office. But generally, just thank you for the openness and receptivity to sharing what's happening in the budget with our audience, with our clients, and just continued efforts on the budget. And we'll hope that everything goes to form and in the time that it's supposed to going forward here. So thanks again, Director Flood, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, bye bye.